Good afternoon and welcome to the Camden Opera House. My name is Dave Morrison. I'm the Opera House manager, and I'm so happy that you've joined us today. This afternoon, we're happy to present the first literary salon of the new year, Love Belfast, a celebration of love poems and the vibrant poetry scene in Belfast, Maine, our neighbors to the north. This event is supported by your donations to the Community Arts Fund. You can help us to offer free live streams of a wonderful variety of performances by donating at camdenoperahouse.com. And if you have already, thank you so much. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce our host for today, acclaimed poet and current poet laureate of Belfast, Judy Garber, and welcome our poets.
Wow, it's so great to be here. I really want to thank Dave and the staff at the Camden Opera House for inviting us here, and we are all so thrilled to be actually reading to an audience that's a live audience and not on Zoom. I have with me three other poet laureates, former poet laureates of Belfast. If you don't know Belfast, I need to tell you that it is a town that is just overwhelmed with poetry. There are at least 3 active poetry critique groups that I'm aware of, and probably some that I'm not aware of. So we're going to start the evening with Ellen Sander. Ellen was a poet laureate of Belfast from 2013 to 2014. She has a rock and roll heart and is the author of Trips, Rock Life in the 60s, which was recently reissued by Dover Publications. Her book Hawthorne, A House in Bolinas was published by Finishing Line Press in April 2017. And her latest poetry chapbook, Aquifer, Poems Evoked by Water, was published by Red Bird Chapbooks this past January. She's served on the steering committee of the Belfast Poetry Festival and is a member of Beyond Baroque, the Authors Guild, the Maine Poet Society, and the Academy of American Poets. Please welcome Ellen.
I'm going to have to time myself, so give me a second. Start. Good. Okay. All right. So welcome. It's so good to have you here. You know, Valentine's Day is a celebration of romantic love, but somehow that strikes me as being the most fleeting, if the most intense kind of love. So today we're going to explore all kinds of different ways of loving and love. Love has a multiplicity of permutations, and there is hardly a vocabulary for it. And that's where poetry comes in. I'm going to start with Love and Friendship by Emily Bronte. Love is like the wild rose briar, friendship like the holly tree. The holly is dark when the rose briar blooms, but which will bloom most constantly? The wild rose briar is sweet in spring, its summer blossoms scent the air. Yet wait till winter comes again, and who will call the wild briar fair? Then scorn the silly rose wreath now, and deck thee with the holly's sheen, that when December blights thy brow, he still may leave thy garland green. So love is a complicated thing. So many different kinds of loves and permutations of love. Love in marriage over time and through major transitions is probably the most perplexing kind of love, which this poem, For Love by Robert Creeley, struggles with. It might be a little difficult to follow in the middle, but it all comes together at the end. This poem is dedicated to his wife, Bobby, dedicated to and addressed to, but I'm reading it today for you, Sarah Creeley. For Love by Robert Creeley. For Bobby. Yesterday I wanted to speak of it, that sense above all others to me important, because all that I know derives from what it teaches me. Today, what is it that is finally so helpless, different, despairs of its own statement, wants to turn away endlessly, to turn away? If the moon did not, no. If you did not, I wouldn't either. But what would I not do? What prevention, what thing so quickly stopped that love yesterday or tomorrow, not now? Can I eat what you give me? I have not earned it. Must I think of everything as earned? Now, love also becomes a reward, so remote from me, I have only made it with my mind. Here is tedium, despair, a painful sense of isolation, and whimsical, if pompous, self-regard. But that image is only of the mind's vague structure, vague to me because it is my own. Love, what do I think to say? I cannot say it. What have you become to ask? What have I made you into? Companion, good company, crossed legs with skirt, or soft body under the bones of the bed. Nothing says anything but that which it wishes would come true, fears what else might happen in some other place, some other time, not this one. A voice in my place, an echo of that only in yours. Let me stumble into not the confession, but the obsession I begin with now for you, also, some time beyond place, or place beyond time, no mind left to say anything at all, that face gone now, into the company of love, all returns. This next poem is about the love of fire for fuel. It's one of mine. It's called Wildfire. I have stolen the ashes of chaparral, shoes, rice, chairs, and gowns, hair, coyote, and owl. I set the ash like dry snow to float in the air, notes on a staff in Mixolydian mode, the scale of a love song against a char-soaked sky. Wire veins explode, gases from automobiles detonate in gated driveways, fume, and in the deer parks of the nearby woods, burnt snakeskins crumble, their scales trace slitted tracks in the ash. Machine-made fumaroles gush raging love of fuel for fire, air for flame, flares for bursting gales of wind. How is everyone you love in the regional candescence, in the smoky thermogenesis of love, whose bodies in friction exhale smolder? Your lips are still greased from last night's lamb chops, and someone decides it is undoubtedly the wine. There will be meat when we return from this hunt, but no one left to eat it, only relics, spires of stone hearths built to cradle fire, tall sentinels defending the ruin. Sacred triad of love. Every child, savior, God, sire, virgin, mother of every being named in this conversation. The forest lit by centuries-old trees pronouncing the drunken scorch of history's scale, so brutally weighted it falls to earth, born in love and fire, perished in fire and love. For many years now, I have co-hosted a poetry writing group we call Poetry Woodshed that Joel Littman and I started in the summer of 2015. And the focus of the group is advancing works in progress by collaborative critique. I love this group, the time we spend together, and the amazing work that comes out of it. Lourdes Tutang Garcia, one of the Sheddies, gave me permission to read her love poem, Simple Love Prayer. Delight of my life, coddle me in your soul so I may recover from having once lived without you. Open your life to my being. Let me settle in your heart to amplify my love for you as you amplify yours for me. Let the scripture of our heart song reverberate forever in every crevice of the world, giving song to others. Thank you, Lourdes. So, Jacob, it is wonderful to be here on a stage with my sisters in crime here, fellow Poets Laureate of Belfast, and it's just a great privilege. But we have had men as Poet Laureate of Belfast, and the one surviving one who still lives in Belfast is Jacob Fricke, and we are very, very close, and I wrote this poem for him when he came out. For Jacob coming out, outing, this river kisses both shores, rolls over light. No bravery in being who it is, no thought to anything passing by. Its bulging twine through bends and arches in beauteous prey. And then I'm reading from Aquifer, my latest chapbook, published by Redbird Chapbooks. I'm very, very happy to have this out. And then there is erotic love, and it's kissing cousin, forbidden love. Ewan. I woke alone to a chill moon, the other pillow warm with your scent. You landed in my universe meaty with a puckish chin, Adriatic blue eyes, and a way of saying my name twice like a bell. All of a sudden, a flight to Quebec. And that night, the sheets lay against the Serengeti of your chest, moved with the scirocco of your breath. We ransacked the shimmering plains, your monsoon thunder fading tenuously in settling skies, on quivered grasses, darkness overpainting aubergine shadows. I remember you thus and always will on the profane bench of your memorial. When I hear those songs in the ether, or resense how we learn to look at one another with a stillness no affect no one else could recognize. We came to our feet taller and more momentarily immortal. Had I died first, it would be you sitting with our secret on a pew, gladiola, hats about the room, the black jacket and your saddle, pictures of a face in golden folds, giving to light a lavish torment. It was not for us to go on and grow old together. We both knew you would not grow old. So I have been in love more than a few times, and between that there have been periods, sometimes very, very long periods, where I have not been in a relationship and have felt very deserted and alone and undeserving and odd. And I looked to poetry to get me through this, and it did, because my love of words and language led me to understand that love is both a verb and a subject. It is a verb and a noun. It needs no object. Love is an independent thing. It is with us always, and it is the breath of life, and you are never without it. This poem is from my husband, John. The space between us is shaped like a melon, warm like a field stone, full as a river making a groove in the stone and the clay we are made of. This poem, I love this poem, The Sick Rose by William Blake. Whether or not we choose to admit it, we all know about sick love, and firsthand or secondhand. So this poem is about a worm ravenous with love that kills the rose. O rose, thou art sick, the invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm, has found out thy bed of crimson joy, and his dark, secret love does thy life destroy. Boy, William Blake really understood that. And my last poem is one of mine, another on a rose theme. My love is like a rose, each day as I arose. My love a rose knows. My love is like a rose you give to me, and all those things that roses be. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen. Our next reader is Corinne Spitfire. She was Poet Laureate of Belfast from 2007 to 2008. She's a multimedia artist, including stage performances, collaborative community happenings, poetry, letterpress art, and artist books. Her poem, Liquidation, won the national first place in the 2019 Jogovia Outermost Poetry Contest, which is a big deal. Her latest poetry collection, The Body in Late Stage Capitalism, was published in January and is now available at local independent bookstores. Please welcome Corinne.
What a thrill to be here. Thank you, Dave, and the Camden Opera House, and thank you for coming. And thank our audience online. This poem is by Joy Harjo, the Poet Laureate of Turtle Island, otherwise known as the United States. Weapons, or what I have taken in my hand to speak when I have no words. Black. Before there was anything else possible, we settled there, not far from the river, at the edge of night. There were no words for eyes or light or even being. Imagination took its first breath while we were camped there in the nowhere. Yellow. We struck up a conversation. Somebody opened their hand with food. The drum brought forth language of the earth. An elder woman's voice urged the stars out of their homes to come and dance with us. A young man followed with a new song that brought excitement to the young woman wrapped in shawls who were dancing and brought forth the ancestors to dance with us. Red. Each of us is a wave in the river of humanity. If we break, we bleed out. If we move forward together, we are bound together in the scarlet waters of belief. One side is war, one side feeds the generations. We are bright with the need for life. Green. After the winter snow, after you have left, after giving up, after the planting, after the letting the horses roam free to roam, after loving, after yes, never no, the grasses rise up from the earth and answer the winds in the song. After I rise up with this shimmering love to sing. Blue. If you really love me, sweetheart, you would not forsake me here at the dawn of forever. I will always love you, always, sang the sky to eternity. I will meet you there at the seamless edge of sunrise. Joy Harjo. I got the shakes, so don't mind me. I know what to do with them. This poem is called Liquidation. It's the poem that Judy was just speaking of. I wrote it about 6 years ago. It went through many iterations because I kept learning things that I didn't know. And it's my way of acknowledging that we are on Wabanaki territory. Liquidation. For 36 years, I slept on some shore of Penobscot Bay, paddled the east and west branches of Penobscot River, transverse Penobscot County to get to Medway, Lincoln, the Golden Road, visit Penobscot Marine Museum, Penobscot Theater Company, read the Penobscot Pilot, smell the Penobscot Potato Factory, wake up to the weather on the bay. Penobscot River watershed covers 8,750 square miles from Bucksport to the Canadian-Maine border. Extends with some easy portages to the Allagash and into the St. John, all the way to New Brunswick, or over to the Kennebec and down to Popham and the Bay. From the Bay, you can get anywhere, Schoodic, Monhegan. I know a few of the carrying places, can read the water some, know where I might find wild berries, sight eagles, blue heron, from Castine to Isle Ho, Brooklyn to Camden, Belfast to Mount Desert. Know where I might go swimming, Naskag, McGonagall, Pemaquid. Names I've learned to say the way the settlers say them, but none we've appropriated like Penobscot. A mispronunciation of the people's name for themselves, the river, the land, Panawaskia, meaning the river, the land, the people. Here for some 13,000 years, 90% annihilated by incoming immigrant settler germs. The remaining estimate, 10,000 in 1700, fought with the colonialists in their revolution, now number under 2,000. Cut down by genocidal scalp bounties, war, alcohol, child abduction. The Penobscots treated into 22 square acres of their homelands, a swath of the river and its islands from Medway to Old Town. Now the state that dubs itself Maine claims this stretch, the river, does not include the water. Panawaskia, land, Panawaskia, river, Panawaskia, people. And this is my bid to you to go talk to your legislatures right now. This week, there's a hearing to fix some of the Maine Indian claims settlement. It's called LD 1626, LD 1626. Please write. And if you need more information, there's plenty of it online. Thank you. Now this book, American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassins, is written by Terrence Hayes, author of Lighthead, winner of the National Book Award. I think this might be the first sonnet I've ever read in public. 7 of the 10 things I love in the face of James Baldwin concerns the spiritual elasticity of his expression. The sachet between left and right eyebrow, for example. The crease between his eyes like a tuning fork or a furrow, like a riverbed branching into tributaries like lines of rapturous sentences searching for a period. The dimple in his chin narrows and expands like a pupil. Most of all, I love all of his eyes and those wrinkles, the feel and color of wet driftwood in the mud around those eyes. Mud is made of simple rain and earth, the same baptismal spills and hills of dirt James Baldwin is made of. And this is a brand new poem I've never read in public, so it's a couple of years old. White, blues, and reds. Blue, so blue. Blue like those songs wrapped up and tied around each other, melody and rhythm hammering out. Love's a fickle and contemptuous thing. Have got those got nobody blues for so long it shows, not like an elastic, not like a telltale bit of slip, but like an elastic completely worn out down around my ankles blues, these daily bread blues. Nothing like my blue with the world blue, have the Dodge and blues, flurry-do and blues, oscillating and brawling with the stultifying low down done in by the litany of bloodletting, water-polluting, earth-drilling, soul-sucking extortionists are winning blues. These I'm alive, white, seeing red blues. And ever grateful that the sky blue and the sea blue and the blue of blue that makes green, orange, red, yellow leaves shout the beauty and the glory of blue, that blue is bigger than blue me. These I'm alive, white, and seeing red blues has me working something screeching, something red hot feverish, taking the fish knife to the little white lies, slashing blank white sheets, excising white struck dumb, tearing up red carpets, kneading, scratching, clawing at white gone snowblind, something where my blues aren't staring into a bare white canvas, and my reds are dismantling the white elephant and lining up to testify, obliging a world full of color, a world full of color. I consider all poems love poems. If I were God, I would come to you quietly in the practice ways of Mohawks. I would stand right next to you like an oak, like your beloved dog, like a barnacle. I would wait for you to inhale me, and we'd exhale the whole world. If I were God, I would stand right next to you until you knew yourself as me. Then, like a mother, whisper, clean up your room, and you would do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Elizabeth Garber. She was Poet Laureate from 2006 to 2007. She's the author of a memoir in progress, Sailing at the Edge of Disaster, a memoir of a girl's daring year, about her perilous year at sea on a square rigger that ended up being held hostage in Panama in 1972. She's also author of Implosion, a memoir of an architect's daughter, and she has 3 books of poetry, and the book Maine, published by Island Time in 2013, which was a collaboration of her poetry and essays with paintings and photographs by Michael Weymouth. Elizabeth?
Well, I'm glad to be included. I wrote poetry for about 25 years, which is a great mode of writing when you've got kids, that you can get a poem in or a first draft before breakfast and edit in the evenings or have ideas and jot down ideas about while driving. But then there were some bigger stories that started demanding I write, and it coincided with my kids leaving home. So I've been writing bigger stories for the last 10 years. But this is a love story about a poet, and it's called A Love Story with Daughters. And it has a poem in the middle of it, a poem in 4 parts, and I'll be reading each part of the poem as we get to it in the story. So it begins with an epigraph by Stanley Kunitz. The poet doesn't so much as disappear into the poem as become the poem. The double oak doors at the bookstore gusted open with sharp, crisp air as friends arrived, pulling off scarves and gloves before picking up my new book of poetry off the counter. When the bell over the door rang again, I turned to see the widower enter. Graying sandy hair, hand-knit sweater, he looked right at me with a bashful smile before he glanced away and ducked down an aisle of books. I also turned quickly, heart racing, my breath caught in my chest. He came, he came. 5 years after my divorce, in my early 50s, I'd believed, like a prayer, that someone would come to one of my poetry readings and they'd fall in love with me. 2 years of giving a lot of readings around Maine, it hadn't happened yet. But I kept wishing. This is a secret wish of poets. I had no idea this was not a good idea, that this was a dangerous wish, that there was a difference between loving the poet and loving me. As I read my poems that night, I glanced around the crowd, purposely skirting his attentive eyes until I was reading my poem about kissing in the kitchen. Oh shit, I'm in the middle of reading this poem when I glance out and I look at him, and my eyes lift from the page and my mind broadcasts these silent headlines that say, oh my God, I want to kiss him. A blush cascaded across my cheeks while I tried to bury my face in my lines. He lingered after the book signings. In your poems, I feel like I'm right there. How do you do that? He laughed at himself to ask such a thing. It's just that I want to write down the things that my daughter says, but I never do. He told me how just that day his 10-year-old daughter curried him with brushes as if he was her horse. I was captivated by his story. I urged him, you have to write down these moments, but already I wanted to write their stories. As he turned to leave, carrying my book, he said, what I'm looking forward to most is to get to know you better. After my drive home in the November dark, I stayed up late and wrote my first poem about her before I'd even met her, 4 stanzas in his voice. Stanza 1. It was 7 degrees and the wind was wild. I don't know why we were still out in the yard. It was so cold. But I had seen her once 2 years before at a community fundraising auction. I was sitting in a high-backed chair that was up for sale when I glanced into the startling blue eyes of a man looking at the same chair with a little pigtailed girl tugging at his sleeve. Throughout the evening, I glanced across the room at this man and his daughter, who both clung to him and ran off with her friends. Finally, I asked someone, who is he? A few days later, I looked up his number and left an awkward message. We met for tea a few weeks later after a hurricane slammed the coast, arriving at the cafe, both of us wearing yellow foul weather gear and knee-high rubber boots. Across the table, he said, "When I got out of the shower this morning, I heard a terrific crackling noise. The wind had ripped the cover off of his 5 cords of dry firewood." He said, "I looked at my dry clothes waiting on the chair. Why get them wet?" So he simply laced on his work boots and headed out into the storm. He lashed down the tarp before he took another shower. I'd flushed, imagining him wrestling with the tarp, rain streaming through his hair, his arms grasping the ropes, this man naked in the storm. He'd said, "My full-time job is raising my daughter since my wife died." His stories of life on the farm enchanted me. I laughed too much. In the sudden calm after the storm, we walked to the bay to watch the rescue of submerged and broken sailboats. As we walked back up the hill, I felt strangely saddened. I knew I wouldn't hear from him again. 2 years passed, and he'd heard me on the radio in an hour-long interview, talking and reading from my newly released book of poems. He pulled the car over and listened to the whole show. He told me later he realized he had made a mistake and he had missed out on someone special. He watched the papers for my readings. He showed up for one, but it was too packed and his daughter was intimidated by the crowd. He decided to wait for a smaller, more intimate location to hear me read and talk to me. Stanza 2. She had her horse brushes laid out on the ground, and she began to brush me down. She even carefully brushed my face. Over the next year, he and I would review that first evening at the bookstore, how he'd left his daughter with his friends to drive 40 minutes on dark country roads to a poetry reading, doubting himself the whole way. Why am I going all this way? That night, after he'd collected his daughter and put her to bed, he'd stayed up late reading my poems. The next morning, he wrote his first letter, describing his delicious confusion. Lines like that just really get a poet. Don't you always want someone to write a letter like that to you? Where, if any, is the boundary between you, the woman, and the poetry you create? If I'm attracted to one, am I attracted to the other also? It might be easier if I hadn't met you. The morning after the poetry reading, my teenage daughter said, "So how did the reading go last night?" I blurted, "Remember that man I met a few years ago and never heard from again? He came." My daughter smiled indulgently. At 16, she didn't get crushes like me. She prided herself on being rational. But recently she had informed me that she thought it was a good time for me to start a relationship since she was leaving home in a year and a half. She said, "Mom, but don't get too excited about this guy. I'll have to meet him to see if I approve." After his first letter, I sent him the poem. Stanza 3. My daughter came up to me with a short rope. I took it. Immediately, I became her horse. She said, "There, there, easy girl," and led me to the side of the barn. His first phone call, he told me about his daughter. "After your reading, I was inspired to compose haiku with her on a long Thanksgiving drive." He described how they were silent for half an hour, each making notes and counting syllables with their fingers. Then they stopped and read them to each other. I was amazed at her word choices. They were so fresh, much better than mine. At the end of that first call, he faltered. "Maybe it's a selfish thing. I know from your poems you like to go walking alone, but could I go for a walk with you?" "Yes," I said, my heart soaring. After every walk or call, his words lingered and I wrote them into poems and sent them. On the phone, he admitted he was a little intimidated by my writing and my heart fell. I was too much. I needed to rein myself in. A few days later, I saw him downtown in a crowd of carolers for the lighting of the Christmas tree. I watched him, a middle-aged man in a yellow down jacket and hand-knit hat, with his daughter hanging on him before dashing off with friends. I was scared, but he came up to me and blurted, "I was wrong. I'm not intimidated." Relief surged through me. We moved away from the crowd so we could talk. He said, it just took me a while to get used to seeing my life turn up in your poems. But I like them, and since I met you at a poetry reading, I knew that might be one of the risks of knowing you. We couldn't stop glancing at each other, our faces flushed with pleasure as his daughter swung on his arms between us, glancing up intently at me. I was charmed by them both, compelled after every visit to write poems. Over that year, I created a portrait of his daughter's life at age 10, as she pranced like a horse in the yard, as we planted a garden, as we sailed on the boat he'd built, froze peaches, stacked firewood, while my daughter was away for the summer. As for love, I didn't just test the waters. I didn't just put a toe in. I dove in, allowing his daughter to become a child I cradled in my heart. He fell in love with me, just as I had wished at my poetry readings. He left messages on my answering machine that I copied into my journal. Under the spell of a reading, as we walked in the dark, he'd say, "You're the last great love of my life." But something would happen, and after the spell of the poetry faded, he would draw back into his life on the farm. It seemed he loved the poet when I read, but not the woman in daily life. It would be a year of his confusion, while my heart ascended and sank over and over. My daughter saw through me like X-ray. She lectured me, "Mom, all he wants is for you to pay attention to his daughter, to be your mom. Besides, she's not interesting like me." My daughter would try a new tact, accosting me over dinner. "Who's most important? Me. You're abandoning me for them?" Then she'd add her old joke, "Don't you remember, I'm always right. You'll see." But I couldn't laugh. I couldn't stop hoping, longing for him, for the two of them. When I said goodnight to my daughter at bedtime, she said, "Don't you see how this hurts me?" And my eyes filled with tears. Both of our daughters saw right through us, my enchantment with a confused man. They both wanted their solo parent back for themselves, and in the end, they got what they wanted. In the end, when we met at a cafe the next winter, he said, "I never fully loved you. I kept trying. I wanted to." A week later on the phone, he said he'd been rereading my poems. "You sweep me off my feet. Can we see each other soon?" And that time I said, "No." My new poems were about grieving, of life in their absence. The last winter before my daughter left home, our life together became my muse again, as I mourned her last months at home. In August, she and I leaned into each other, looking through the photo album of her high school years. My hair changed length and grade. I looked smaller as I wrapped my daughter in my arms. I turned a page, startled to find photos of the widower and his daughter still in my book. My daughter protested, "Why do you want them in our photo album?" I hardly recognized him. Even here he was fading, avoiding the camera's eye, but his daughter beamed. Her eyes still caught mine. I answered quietly, speaking in past tense for my daughter, "Because I loved her." But in my own quiet, I said it differently, "Because I love her." Over the years, I'd see his daughter in the co-op parking lot, trick-or-treating at my door or walking a puppy. With her aunt, I visited her at the stables as she grew tall and strong. When she sent me her high school graduation invitation with a note saying I was one of the people who'd made a difference in her life, I wept. I followed her posts online as she rode horses in college, always training in competitions, until even after she found the lump behind her knee. She made it through her college graduation on crutches, radiant despite her chemo-bald head, but she only lived a few months beyond. The day his daughter died, I found the first poem and printed it out to have ready for him. I knew he'd call and ask for it. Stanza 4. I wanted to say, it's cold, we should go in, but I didn't. She lifted my right foot and cleaned my hoof. She lifted the left and did the same. Then she lifted my right foot again. Now I will clean your back hooves. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So now I'd like to share a few poems. Lately, I have been working on writing sonnets, which is a difficult form. And so I've been reading a lot of sonnets, and I'm going to start with a sonnet. It's written by a local writer who has passed away. I think we can call her a local writer, who was an excellent writer of sonnets and also of love poems, and that's Edna St. Vincent Millay. This is sonnet number 30. Love is not all. It is not meat, nor drink, nor slumber, nor a roof against the rain, nor yet a floating spar to men that sink and rise and sink and rise and sink again. Love cannot fill the thickened lung with breath, nor clean the blood, nor set the fractured bone. Yet many a man is making friends with death, even now as I speak, for lack of love alone. It may well be that in a difficult hour, pinned down by pain and moaning for release, or nagged by want past resolution's power, I might be driven to sell your love for peace, or trade the memory of this night for food. It may well be. I do not think I would. This next poem is a poem of mine. It's written in a form that was created by Jericho Brown. It's called the Duplex, and it is a form that has a lot of repetition in it, and you'll hear that in the poem. It's called Duplex, Love Poem. I carry love in my mouth like a broth that runs down my chin. I wipe it clean. Love runs down my chin. I wipe it clean, press against the warmth of it, the comfort. The warmth and comfort is one side of it, not the part that leaves fury and scars, the part that leaves tracks on the hull of my face. My mouth is hollow. I cry air, cry silence. My hollow mouth carries air, carries silence to move me from despair. I want to open my mouth, scoop out that anguish, lick your skin until I am agape with it. I lick your skin until I am agape with it. I carry your love in my mouth like a broth. So it's very easy to write love poems when you're young, when you're in your teens or your 20s, and you just are so full of everything. But if you're older, particularly if you're in a long-term relationship for many, many years, love changes. It's still there, but it's different. So this is a poem called Old Bodies. Chests pressed together, legs shift, find space. My hand follows an old path, the groove of his back, from shoulder to sweet curve below, marked with the day's scent. I think of what I will become later in a box tucked in white branch clay. Each day, I lift my face to sun, carry its heat with me. Like the spruce tree, I bear the breeze. Like the tree, the wind batters me. The world will etch me in ink, but that's a vain thought. It knows nothing of me. I'm no more than pebbles or a rain-flecked stream. In our bed, there are no keys, no locks, no doors, only the heat we generate, the wet-tongued moments that carry us through bruised and yearning days. This next poem is another poem about older love. It's by Stanley Kunitz, and it's called Touch Me. Summer is late, my heart. Words plucked out of the air some 40 years ago when I was wild with love and torn almost in two, scatter like leaves this night of whistling wind and rain. It is my heart that's late. It is my song that's flown. Outdoors, all afternoon, under the gunmetal sky, staking my garden down, I kneeled to the crickets trilling underfoot, as if about to burst from their crusty shells, and like a child again, marveled to hear so clear and brave a music pour from such a small machine. What makes the engine go? Desire, desire, desire. The longing for the dance stirs in the buried life. One season only, and it's done. So let the battered old willow thrash against the window panes, and the house timbers creak. Darling, do you remember the man you married? Touch me, remind me who I am. So the other thing about love is there are lots of ways to communicate it. It isn't all about touch, and it isn't all about sex, and it isn't all about romance. Sometimes it's more about the things that we do day to day. So this is a poem that you might construe as a love poem. It's called Learning to Strip Wire. The new section of the house needs power. So my husband shows me how to strip wire, lays out the tools, pliers for pulling out the thick yellow cables, blue folding utility knife with extra sharp blade, wire cutter with its mysterious holes, then demonstrates the process. Find the end of the cable, pull it straight, work out the kinks, and then reach deep in the receptacle to where it begins. Run the blade down the middle. Press just hard enough to cut through, not deep enough to hurt the wires inside. Tear back the plastic covering, the paper cover around the copper ground. Slice them off, then use the wire cutter. The numbers go up for smaller holes. Find the right size, most likely 12. Put it on about an inch from the end, twist back and forth, then pull hard, he says in an encouraging tone, as I watch each move he makes, fingers thick and sure, charged with memory and confidence, like the sky before a storm, full of bristling clouds, push of monumental air. So I take up the first tool, try not to think about electricity, the way it sometimes snaps, surges free of wires, jumps across innocent air, looking for a good conductor, metal, water, wife. So the other thing about love is sometimes you fall out of love, or you think you've fallen out of love. I was once married before and divorced. And you think that's all over. But my ex-husband recently died, and I discovered that that love was still there in a way. Sort of like a pebble in your heart that never goes away. So this is a poem that has to do with that love. For years we knew leukemia trundled in my ex-husband's marrow, warping cells, making his steps falter, his feet grow infections, his body stumbling toward the abyss. He saw an oncologist, but also spent hours in the blue room with its UV light, sound therapy, sacred geometry. Cancer moved beyond his blood, into his throat, his lungs, his liver, and in the dawn-colored light of late July, my son and I went to visit him. What did he do, this wreck of a man who I once married? I want to wail when I see his flail, thin body, skin pulled tight on bones, throat constrained by a plastic tube to let air in now that his tongue barricades the cavern of his mouth. Our hug becomes a huddle, a hum of forgiveness, a hush of past mistakes, unkind words, years-old strife. Hope trespasses into me and my son. It's a weight we can't keep out, a song that keeps piping in our brains that says he has months and who knows, maybe years. Hope trowels the mouth of death, leaves us with our back to the wall where traces of truth appear. My ex-husband had a great laugh. It would thrum in you, fill you. I remember having to leave the room, scurry away. I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe, was suffocating in his zany humor, his raucous wit, in the comedy of his being. And the last poem I'm going to share with you is about love of children, love of our children, love of all children, and also love and hope for the world in what is certainly a difficult time. It's a poem written by Maggie Smith, and the title is Good Bones. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep from my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible. And for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I'm trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? you could make this place beautiful. Thank you for coming.